Hello my friends, in today's video, I will tell you the real story of the brutal murders that happened in the 50s, some of which were set in the popular movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Alright, let's get started. Saturday, November 16, 1957, Bernice Worden, owner of a building materials store, was quite sure she would be back when she left her house that fateful morning, hardly conscious that these were the last moments of her life. Bernice arrived at the store and began her usual morning routine, according to John, the owner of the gas station across the street from where Worden's store is clearly visible. He saw her at 8:15 in the morning, checking her mail as usual. Soon he noticed a car pull up to unload the equipment. Sometime between 8:30 and 9:30, as John remembered it, the truck pulled away from the store, driven by what he then thought was a man Bernice had hired as a driver for a routine delivery. John went on about his business. Later, he crossed the road to Worden's store and found the front door closed. He noticed that Bernice had left the lights on. But considering it was the opening day of hunting season, and usually there weren't many customers on such a day, he just figured Bernice had closed earlier for that reason. That evening, Bernice's son, Frank, who had been out hunting all day, stopped at John's gas station to ask about the hunting contest. During the conversation, John told Frank that his mother had closed up store earlier, but the lights were still on. Frank, who was also a deputy sheriff, immediately became concerned. Since he knew that his mom planned to be in the store all day, he immediately started to look into it. As he approached the store, to his horror, he noticed that there was a blood trail leading to the back of the store. He discovered that not only was Bernice missing, the cash register was also gone. Looking for an explanation, he immediately remembered a man who had come into the store late, and he had also been here the previous evening, asking about antifreeze, and had even tried to strike up a conversation with Frank, asking if he would be out hunting the next day, which Frank confirmed. The man was Ed Gain, a hermit who mostly kept to himself. He was known to behave strangely. Most of the time, he even invited Bernice to go roller skating, and given that this was in a small town where everyone knew each other, the words of strange Ed Gain, who spoke to a woman in this manner, startled people. As it was not typical of him, it became the cause for many rumors in the town. Ed Gain was born on August 27, 1906, in Wisconsin. His mother was a zealous religious woman, and her home was dominated by an atmosphere of excessive belief. She constantly warned Ed and his brother Henry about the dangers of women. She despised all sex, especially that which happened outside marriage. It was claimed that sex to continue the species was disgusting, but it had to be tolerated to start a family. Such a rigid and fearful upbringing put the brothers on different sides, while Ed literally worshipped his mother to the point that some called it an obsession. Henry, on the other hand, resisted her strict views. Their father was an alcoholic who was actually afraid of his wife. He died of a heart attack when Ed was in his 30s. Ed worked at various jobs to help his family. He even worked as a babysitter, claiming he was good at it, and was successful with both the children and their parents. It is believed that Ed wanted to win his mother's favor. In 1944, his brother Henry died, but the incident that led to his death was mysterious and highly questionable. Ed called the police to help find his brother, who, according to his report, was missing while trying to put out a fire that was approaching their property. When they arrived, Ed led them right to Henry's body. Strangely, his body showed no signs of burns, even though he was lying on the burnt ground, and there were bruises on the back of his head, but the authorities suspected no willful mischief. for they thought Henry had probably hit his head from smoke inhalation. Shortly after his brother's death, Ed's world fell apart. His beloved mother had a stroke. Ed took full care of her, but 6 months later, a second stroke took her life. Now Ed was alone. He lost the person who was his whole world, and he couldn't let her go easily. Now living as a hermit, Ed only went out to work and spent all his free time at home, where he faithfully kept some parts of the house in order, as his mother had done when she was alive. Those parts of the house were boarded up, while the rest was completely abandoned, and if Ed had not been bothered before, now must be the time for it. Upon examining the scene, Frank discovered that the last check for the gallon of antifreeze sold to Ed Gain had been written that morning. With his sheriff's instincts and reliable intuition, Frank immediately tracked down Gain. A knock on Ed's door caught him in the middle of something awful. On the other side of the house were teenagers who needed help with the car, but the kids were familiar to Ed. They were from a neighboring family where Ed often dined. They noticed his hands were covered in blood. He stated he was carving a deer. He needed to wash up before helping them with the car. Ed stayed for dinner with their family, and as they were finishing up, they learned of Warden's disappearance. The neighbor's son asked Gain if he would give him a ride to see what was going on, and he agreed. Before they left law enforcement arrived looking for Gain and found him sitting in his car with the neighbor's son. They put Ed in the back of the police car and asked him to elaborate on how he spent that day from morning to evening. Then they asked him to tell the story again, and Ed failed. They began questioning him, to which Gain replied, "Somebody slandered me." Then the officers asked him what and who might have slandered him, and he said it was Mrs. Worden. They pressed for more answers. They asked Gain what happened to Mrs. Worden and what he thought he was wanted for. His answer was as only the person involved in the crime could know, since at that time people only knew that she had disappeared. Gain compromised himself by saying, "She is dead, isn't she?" While Gain was in custody, officers checked his property, and what they found was truly horrifying. Mrs. Worden's body was in the garage, suspended by the ankles, decapitated and disemboweled like a deer carcass, her head found in a bag, and her heart near the stove in a plastic bag. Mrs. Worden's body among other human remains found in the property. In addition, a refrigerator full of human organs was found in the Gain estate, and later, some people speculated that he had stored them to cook and eat later. Other bodies discovered were found in a completely unbelievable way, as if they were part of the household furnishings. They found furniture trimmed with human skin and body parts, a paper basket, lamps, flaps made of lips, and even a chair with fat still attached that was used as a seat. But that was not all. Skulls were arranged like bedposts, and various body parts were also found. Noses, lips, nails, boxes with parts of female genitals. And if that doesn't scare you enough, further on, they also found leather suits consisting of human skin and 9 masks sewn from women's faces. An autopsy later revealed that Mrs. Worden had been shot in the back of the head with a .22 caliber and had been mutilated after death. After brutal interrogation over the following days, Gain finally confessed, stating that it had been an accident. Gain noted that he often fell into a stupor and that he usually came out of it before anything dangerous could happen, and that he had no particular recollection of the killing since it had happened while he was in a stupor. Judging by how many bodies were found at his estate, Gain was a serial killer, yet he claimed to have collected other bodies from graves between 1947 and 1952. Gain often read the memorial lists and explained that he frequently visited cemeteries, about 40 times in that time period, but always in a state of mental fog. Of the vast number of times he visited cemeteries, 9 times he could not get out of his stupor and dug up the bodies of middle-aged women who resembled his mother, which he used to create the horror that the police found in his house. Several graves were unearthed and there were body parts missing or no bodies at all, confirming Gaines' story. It is said that he also stole his mother's corpse after it was buried. Some say that he apparently hoped to literally get into her skin. It is also said that he carried body parts and danced with them outside under the moon. The skull of Mary Hogan, the tavern owner who disappeared in December 1954, was also found at his home. Some sources reported that Gaines also confessed to killing her, but most sources say he never admitted it and then denied it. They even say he told people he killed her, but usually his confession was just written off as him being strange. Gaines was charged with first-degree murder in the Bernice Worden case. He was also accused of stealing the cash register and its contents. Gaines responded to the charges that he was not guilty by reason of inadequacy. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, admitting he could not stand trial. He was first sent to Central State Hospital with insanity for the crime committed, and then transferred to another hospital. Strangely, after the trial, his house was destroyed by fire, all suspicion of anyone's involvement unconfirmed. His car, which had been used to transport the bodies, was sold to an amusement park. In 1968, 10 years after his hospitalization, it was finally seen fit to put Gaines on trial for the murder of Bernice Worden, where he continued to prove his innocence on grounds of inadequacy. He denied his right to a jury trial, leaving his fate in the hands of a judge alone. The trial consisted of 2 parts, the first to determine whether Gaines was guilty of murder, and the second to determine whether or not he was in good health at the time of the murder. During his testimony, Gaines stated that the shotgun he was checking out the Worden store accidentally went off, killing Bernice. Gaines was found mentally inadequate at the time of the murder and was subsequently found guilty. At a press conference shortly after his trial, he blamed his upbringing for his behavior. He was not charged with the murder of Mary Hogan or grave robbery. He was sent back to Central State Hospital with insanity for the crime committed, from where he had applied for release in the 1970s, but was denied. Ed Gaines was there until July 26, 1984, at which time he died of respiratory failure due to lung cancer at the age of 77. And so, you may be asking yourself, how did these horrific events form the basis of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Leatherface is a completely fictional character, but elements of the story, in general terms, were taken from Ed Gaines' real-life crimes. Director Tobe Hooper once said in an interview that his character Leatherface and some parts of the movie were borrowed from Gaines and his brutal crimes. Aside from the main character, the way the film relates to Gaines is evident in its details. Some of them encapsulated in certain elements, others directly demonstrated by the characters, such as cannibalism, the killing and dismemberment of many women, scenes with rooms full of furniture made of human remains, besides one character being stabbed with a meat hook. The scope of the Leatherface murder wave was broader than that of the real prototype. Ed Gaines was undeniably a killer whose world was unhealthy, twisted, and horrifying. If you liked this video, like it and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next videos.